to record to this computer, though. What would be the difference with that? I have two participants. I have an AI participant and myself in the meeting. Welcome, everyone. This is Professor James Globe in cybersecurity. We're going to go on to our next set of topics. Let me share the screen here. And put in presentation mode, and we will get started. All right. On to the next section. In this lecture, we'll be talking about vulnerability management, the importance of vulnerability management, security assessments and audits, and auditing and accountability. So let's jump right into this topic. So vulnerability management is the process of finding, assessing, remediating, and mitigating security weaknesses in your information system or information IT ecosystem. So that's finding vulnerabilities or weaknesses in operating systems running on your servers, your desktops, your laptops, portable devices in your environment, to include virtual servers and virtual endpoints running maybe in your virtual private cloud that you pay for or lease from a cloud provider. It includes software running on those endpoints, whether it's Microsoft Outlook or Microsoft PowerPoint, Office products, HR products, Salesforce, a CRM product, payroll product, whatever that software is looking for vulnerabilities in those, your web server software, in addition to potentially firmware vulnerabilities, et cetera. So it could be pretty vast on what you're looking for between the operating systems and all the various types of software that you may be running in your different environments. But vulnerability management includes the creation and managing of policies and scope definitions, so your password policies, your incident response policies. It's also those things because this is a dynamic world we live in. So it may require more frequent changes of policies that relate to your operating system functioning or particular software usage, in particular like a backup software or a Windows operating system. Et cetera. So vulnerability is defined within the concept of a successful attack or exploitable attack. In this lecture, when we talk about vulnerability, it refers to a fault in the system that is exposed for possible exploitation by a cyber criminal, cyber threat actor. So if they can't discover it, then it can't be exploited. But these are ones that potentially can be exposed such that they can be exploited to carry out cyber attacks. So a cyber threat actor taking advantage of a vulnerability can induce a chain of events that results in compromises to your IT ecosystem. So your servers, your laptops, your desktops, et cetera, your accounts on the system can be compromised based on vulnerabilities in your environment. Vulnerabilities have been documented and disclosed as common vulnerabilities and exposures, CVEs. You could Google that to find the CVE database. Known vulnerabilities are documented and they get a ID that will tell you where to go find patches or mitigation factors for those vulnerabilities. What is vulnerability management? Vulnerabilities can exist in operating systems, firmware, application software, hardware. Vulnerabilities are designed vulnerabilities or assign a CVE ID. Those known ones, vulnerabilities are found in software applications and even smart devices or IoT devices. Some other technical security deficiencies or situations that doesn't comply with organizational IT policies could fall in the vulnerability category. Operating system vulnerabilities, as many as traditional operating system vulnerabilities have been addressed, but they are the most common ones that are exploited by cyber threat actors, especially through misconfiguration or lack of configuring secure features in a operating system. You go with the default settings, like a default password or enabling FTP service, for example. Types of OS attacks includes misconfiguration, exploitation, OS vulnerability exploitation that allows access to the system, as well as admin credentials, service and port exploitation. You don't disable services that are not being used and the port that they run on. HTTP is a good example of that, where the default and policy should accomplish where we only use HTTPS. We only allow for HTTPS connections, which are much more secure, and we don't do anything in the clear using HTTP and that port. There's also the concept of host hardening, and this is where we can get at a company like Center for Internet Security, who has the hardened images where they already pre-configure your operating system to be secure. And this is based on industry experts kind of standard operating procedure for securing certain types of environments. So what is a host hardening and what is the method? So the definition here is host hardening is a method to secure and remove vulnerabilities from the operating system. The hardening can be accomplished both on physical and logical basis. From a logical perspective, it is removing unnecessary applications, unnecessary services, on ports that those services may use should be blocked or disabled. Unnecessary accounts should be disabled or removed. Default counts should be renamed if possible. Default passwords for default accounts should be changed. Actually, must be changed, not should be changed. Vulnerability management also includes firmware. So firmware updates must be some of those more neglected parts of the system. Many subscribe to if it ain't broke, it don't fix, so you don't really worry about kind of firmware updates. But the problem with this approach is that many cases firmware updates are not designed to add functionality or fix something that does not exactly work right. Rather, in many cases, just address security related issues or minor updates. So computers contain a lot of firmware, and all which potentially can be vulnerable to hacking. Everything from USB keyboards, webcams, to graphic cards or sound cards. Even computer batteries have firmware. A simple Google search for firmware vulnerability turns up pages and pages of results of details of various types of firmware vulnerabilities that may not be known. Definitely, it's important for a security professional to understand firmware, its role in your endpoints or the devices running on your computer system, and know these types of vulnerabilities exist. And form a relationship not only with your software vendors like Microsoft, Google, and others, but also a relationship with your firmware providers. Also, a form of exploitation is in your bootloader. So having bootloader protection. So when a system is booting up, there is a window of opportunity for breaking into the system. For example, when the physical access is possible, you could set a system to boot to to a different media, like a CD, believe it or not, still around, or USB. No, probably no longer a floppy disk, but I'm old enough to be back in the days where floppy disk you could boot from that, but a CD, USB, different hard drive sometime, or URL. For this reason, bootloader protection mechanisms should be utilized. Most major operating systems come with built-in password protection for the boot record and the boot loading process. So make sure you enable that and set a password. Its implementation includes Windows Secure Boot, Measured Launch, and Integrity Measurement Architecture with the acronym IMA. Again, attestation services are authorized party that detect changes in the operating systems, and they have baseline known good firmware and base core or kernel configurations. And so if something has been change if a kernel configuration or boot configuration has been changed, potentially you could recover back through a vendor's attestation services. There's also this concept of a TPM chip. Two particular popular uses of TPM are binding and sealing. Binding actually binds the hard drive through an encryption um, algorithm to a particular computer, probably based on the computer's MAC address, which is unique to the computer itself. Because the decryption key is stored in the TPM chip, the hard drive contents are only available when the drive is connected to the original computer. But keep in mind, all of the contents are at risk if the TPM chip fails, and the backup key does not work. Vulnerabilities associated with hardware is also in play here. Vulnerabilities could include backdoors that affect embedded RFID chips in memory, eavesdropping through protected memory without any other hardware being open, faults induced to interrupt normal behavior, hardware modification and tampering with hardware and jailbroken software, backdoors and hidden methods for bypassing normal computer authentication are examples of vulnerabilities that are exploited in hardware. So in an organization, a question to ask yourself is, who is responsible in the organization for assuring critical operating systems and application vulnerabilities are addressed? Is it the CEO, the CISO, the CIO, the IT manager, the SOC director? Who's responsible for making the call that, hey, we're going to have TPM chips on all of our endpoints in our environment? So typically, in an organization that falls in the um, chief information officer um, area responsibility, working with the CISO and reporting those recommendations and maybe getting the thumbs up from the CEO. Then the CIO would work with the IT manager to roll those out to make sure that those things are enabled, whatever types of firmware, hardware checks they want. But typically in most organizations, that would be the CIO that's responsible for that. Next topic is security assessment. So security assessment and auditing should be routinely performed by an organization to determine how secure their systems are. And you want to compare it to some known good. So you can go with a like a SOC 2 compliancy type of check, following those controls, or again, the CIS critical controls, and then assessing yourself against the critical control activities that you should be doing to build up resilience in your IT ecosystem. Assessment teams, they are responsible for elements of the organization for developing, documenting, disseminating, reviewing, and updating all security policies and associated procedures and implementing policy compliant controls. the security policies for the information systems and any associated implementing procedures. The CISO and CIO are responsible for the development, implementation, operating, and maintaining of security controls within the organization. They work closely together. In many cases, the CISO office is the internal auditor of policies and procedures, and you would also have an external or regulatory person also assess your implementation of controls, whether it's for a framework or for a regulatory requirement. Security assessment methods includes recon, network attack, typically preceded by information gathering. So this could be a pen testing type of attack. Both technical tools and non-technical approaches can be used to identify targets and pieces of information to help make a target easier to attack. You might compare this stage of the hacking process to a bank robber casing a bank location. So you may want to, for example, say for one of your network attacks, target the domain server where all your accounts are at, or a web server, in particular, an outward-facing web server for the company website. And you take that approach to see if you can find ways to compromise the system so you can then figure out ways to mitigate those risks and fix those holes in your security architecture. Fingerprinting is another tool. They're designed to scan the network, identify hosts, identify services, and applications running on the system, and any known vulnerabilities. A lot of times these software or these discovery type softwares are smart enough to then go out and find CVE IDs and give you, and they also categorize them as critical, high, medium, low. And so you can make a decision on which ones you fix and which ones you mitigate. There's also malware sandboxing, aimed to detect malware code by running it in a computer, a sandbox computer that has lots of guardrails in place so it can't get out, so the malware can't spread onto your company network. So you can analyze the behaviors and tactics and then make a determination on do you have the software or rules or signatures in place to not only detect it, but potentially block it the next time it's executed in the production environment? Another reason to use a malware sandboxing technique is one of the goals is to spot zero-day malware, which is malware that has not yet been identified by commercial antivirus software or anti-malware software. You can also do things like memory dumping, runtime debugging is used for penetration testing. This is really important, especially in the incident response world. Turning off the computer that's been compromised is a big no-no, even though the malware or attack may be moving lateral in your system. You want to be able to collect all that evidence, those tactics, so you can know what was the root cause of the compromise. So hackers can use memory reading tools to analyze the entire memory content used by the application. Any vulnerability testing should take this into consideration and utilize the same type of memory reading tools to detect any indicators of compromise. Here comes that word again that I used in previous lecture, file hashes, email addresses, IP addresses to potential command and control servers. These are bad guy servers out there that is just loaded up with the additional malware that they will then download onto your system and execute it. Memory dumping can help determine what a hacker might be able to learn if she or he were able to cause a memory dump. Runtime debugging would help correct this approach. And again, this is just a learning process. So you carry out these types of techniques to discover before a threat actor discovers it, what types of things these applications are storing in memory in order to execute. So another discussion to ask yourself is, who is responsible for security assessments and audits in your organization? I mean, who does that? Is it the CEO, CISO, CIO, an IT manager, maybe a SOC director? In most organizations, these types of assessments and audits, again, fall under the CISO's area of responsibility, reporting to the CEO, working with the CIO. Last topic is audit and accountability. So audit and accountability is the process of logging and tracking a subject activity after identification, authentication, and authorization are complete. Audits are performed on systems to ensure compliance with applicable laws, policies, and other bodies of information. We may audit a variety of activities, including compliance with a, strong password policy, backup policy, bring your own device policy. These are things you want to audit to make sure that proper compliance is there. Proper security architecture configuration management is also in play to help you carry out and enforce policies and procedures. Accountability provides us the means to trace activities in our environment back to their source. That's what's key. That's a very key sentence. So and the reason why you need to be able to trace things back to their source, where it got started, so you can determine root cause to better mitigate that attack from reoccurring in your environment. Accountability is a requirement that actions and an entity may be traced uniquely to that entity. Accountability directly supports non-repudiation, deterrence, fault isolation, intrusion detection, prevention, after-action recovery, etc. So this is why logging and then protecting those log files from being compromised is really important, so you can get trace history back on where did it all start. What was our ground zero for this particular type of attack? Cryptography can provide non-repudiation, which is assurance that the specific user performed a specific transaction and assurance, and that did not change. So you protect the integrity of your log files. An audit is a review, examination, or objective appraisal of a project, activity, control, transaction, et cetera, you name it, whatever that unit of transaction, how detailed you want to go, in order to gather evidence. Audits are used to assess compliance with the regulation or to a standard or contractual obligation. Auditing helps the agency determine if expectation regarding confidentiality, integrity, and availability is being met. And that is it that was a short topic. I know. Let me stop the recording. And again, I thank you all for listening.